Hello dear participants, now it's time for Module 4.8, Climate and Environmental Projects in Public Procurement, Spotting Corruption, Irregular Subcontracting during Contract Modification and the Next Steps. This is our last module, so I'd like to thank you very much for being with us for such a long time. Thank you very much. So let's start with the reporting template. This webinar is designed to guide you through the monitoring process in a clear and structured way. It follows the same logic as the report for monitoring projects. The reporting template is divided into 3 steps. Step 1 is the desk analysis. This is where we review the contract information and spot potential corruption risks. Step 2 focuses on contract implementation, checking whether the project is being carried out as promised on the ground. And step 3 looks at results and impact, evaluating whether the outcomes match the objectives and serve the public interest. In this webinar, we'll be focusing on contract implementation and the corruption scheme, irregular phantom subcontracting. We will also examine how such schemes can undermine climate adaptation and environmental infrastructure projects, where misuse of public funds not only delays construction, but weakens community resilience against floods, droughts, and other climate risks. And now let's talk about irregular subcontracting. In some environmental projects, the contracts are deliberately structured to favor construction companies, while ecological specialists are pushed aside. Subcontractors who are supposed to deliver the ecological work often don't exist, or if they do, they would fail to perform. For citizens, the red flags are clear. Look for vague ecological deliverables in the documents, or check on site whether the promised restoration is actually there. If instead of restored habitats you see paved paths, or if herbicide spraying has replaced biodiversity care, that's a strong signal that corruption is at play. Other warning signs include benches and lighting installed where native plants were supposed to be, ornamental flower beds replacing wild meadows, or freshly cut trees standing where habitat protection was promised. Even the absence of ecological monitoring reports or seeing construction debris left in natural areas can be a giveaway. When biodiversity funds produce urban beautification instead of ecological restoration, citizens should suspect misuse of money. When we talk about irregular or phantom subcontracting, there are several warning signs worth paying attention to. Let me walk you through them and explain why they matter. Favored subcontractors. If the same subcontractors keep getting contracts over and over again, it can suggest favoritism or hidden arrangements. Healthy competition usually brings variety, so repetition without clear justification is a red flag. New or changed subcontractor without proper experience. When a subcontractor suddenly appears on a project but doesn't meet the experience requirements laid out in the terms of reference, it raises questions. Why were they chosen? Often, this points to manipulation or side deals rather than merit. Change in the scope of subcontracting. If a contractant originally confirmed they had the ability to perform the work themselves, but later shifts large parts of the job to subcontractors, that's suspicious. It can mean the contractor overstated their capacity just to win the bid, and now they are outsourcing in ways that weren't transparent. Unnotified subcontractors on site. When subcontractors show up on a work site without the contracting authority being informed, it undermines oversight. Authorities can't monitor quality or compliance if they don't even know who is working there. Lack of proper payment to subcontractors. If subcontractors aren't being paid properly, even though the contracting authority is obliged to cover those costs, it signals possible diversion of funds. This can hide kickbacks, inflated invoices, or simply exploitation of smaller firms. Together, these patterns point to irregular subcontracting practices. They don't just create inefficiencies, they open the door to corruption schemes. Citizens and monitors should be alert to these signs because they often reveal deeper problems in how public money is being spent. So, the red flags in the area of subcontracting that especially should be noticed. A subcontractor's role in the contract cannot be expanded if the main contractor uses the subcontractor's qualifications or experience to meet the entry requirements for the tender. Also, the main contractor is not allowed to hand over the entire contract to a subcontractor. And how those red flags can be detected? Let's return to the tender documentation and requirements in the area of subcontracting. Read the questions asked at the tender stage to see if the economic operators paid attention to above-mentioned requirements. Familiarize yourself with the documents if you are able to obtain copies of construction documents. For instance, interim payment certificates, when contract required the entry of the subcontractor and the scope of the work performed. Check who was entered as a subcontractor. On-site visit. It can also be a solution, but it can require a technical knowledge. Now I will tell you one story about phantom subcontracting. It begins with Romania's fragile waste management system. Recycling rates are among the lowest in Europe. Landfills overflow, and enforcement is weak. Into this chaos stepped a network of companies that existed more on paper than in reality. Phantom subcontractors. These subcontractors were registered with impressive names, claiming to handle recycling, processing, or green energy. In practice, they had no facilities, no staff, and no trucks. Their only assets were stamps, signatures, and connections. Western exporters shipped containers of recyclables to Romania. Phantom subcontractors signed contracts promising to process the waste. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Invoices, customs declarations, recycling certificates. In reality, the waste was dumped, burned, or hidden in landfills. Why phantom subcontracting? Because it created layers of deniability. The German or Italian exporter could claim, "We hired a certificate Romanian recycler." The Romanian importer could say, "We subcontracted to a licensed partner." The phantom subcontractor could vanish when authorities came knocking. Each ton of waste saved Western companies up to €1,000 in disposal costs, while Romanian operators charged only €250 per ton. The phantom firms pocketed their cut, then dissolved or re-registered under new names. Authorities began intercepting shipments. Containers in Constanta port labeled raw materials, but filled with rusting farm equipment and plastics. Barges on the Danube carrying grain, but hiding over 1,000 tons of garbage. Trucks crossing borders with paperwork signed by subcontractors that didn't exist beyond a mailbox. For the citizens, phantom subcontracting meant toxic smoke from burning waste, polluted rivers and farmland, landfills expanding near towns. It was corruption labeled as recycling, a shadow economy where garbage became currency, and phantom subcontractors were the brokers. So the paperwork looks legitimate, but the services are never delivered. On this photo, you may see used tires hidden in a truck that was part of a convoy originating in Germany and France in August. Border authorities discovered around 17 tons of undeclared waste in the vehicles. For citizens, the red flags are easy to spot if you know where to look. First, check the paperwork. If the contracts list vague ecological deliverables like recycling services, but don't specify clear outputs, that's suspicious. Second, look at the subcontractors. If they have no track record in recycling or suddenly appear in the chain, they may be phantom firms. And third, go on site. If promised recycling plants are quiet, or if you see piles of waste being burned or buried instead of processed, that's a clear signal of corruption. You can also start by looking at who the subcontractors are. If they have no track record or experience in this sector, that's suspicious. If payments are going to firms that aren't visible on site, it suggests they're not actually doing the work. Complex chains of subcontracting are another warning sign. When contracts are passed through multiple layers, it often hides corruption. And finally, if costs keep rising but there's no added value, it's a clear red flag that phantom subcontracting is being used to siphon off money. Finally, go on site. If promised recycling plants are quiet, or if you see piles of waste being burned or buried instead of processed, that's a strong indicator that the work isn't being done. Put together, these clues reveal the corruption scheme of phantom subcontracting: inflated invoices, bribes, and no real ecological results. Romania's case shows how phantom subcontracting works. Companies that exist only on paper, siphoning money while leaving citizens with pollution and broken promises. It's a reminder that corruption leaves clues, and with vigilance, those clues can be uncovered.
Let me share with you one of the most striking cases of fraud in the EU carbon trading market. Between 2008 and 2009, a criminal group managed to cheat the system and take away an incredible 1.6 billion euro. At first glance, the scheme seems simple, almost too simple but highly effective. The head of operation was eventually convicted for tax fraud worth 385 million euro, but the damage across the system was much greater. And here is how it worked. France applied sales tax (VAT) on carbon credits. The group exploited this by buying VAT-free credits abroad and then reselling them in France with VAT added. Instead of passing the tax on to the authorities, they kept it for themselves. To hide the trail, the money was laundered through a web of dummy companies spread across multiple countries. On paper, everything looked legitimate, but in reality, it was a massive scam. And now, what a citizen just like us can learn from this? Red flags in such cases often include unusually complex chains of companies involved in transactions, large sums moving quickly across borders without clear business justification, markets or products suddenly attracting speculative trading without obvious environmental or social benefit. Another red flag is lack of transparency, because then it's hard to trace who actually owns or controls the companies involved. Spotting these warning signs, those red flags I just mentioned, doesn't mean that you will uncover a €1 billion scam on your own. But it does mean you will know when to ask questions, demand accountability, and push for oversight. And that's really important. Another example that really highlights the risks in climate funding comes from Italy. Between 2016 and 2020, Italy's governmental climate subsidies were at the center of major money laundering scheme. A criminal network set up fictitious projects to falsely claim energy efficiency certifications. And as always, on paper, these projects looked legitimate. But in reality, they didn't exist. By doing this, the group managed to tap into climate subsidies from the Italian government. Eventually, 20 people were arrested as a part of the investigation. But the profits didn't stay in Italy. They were withdrawn in other European countries like Germany and Switzerland, and then funneled back to Italy. To cover their tracks, the criminals used multiple entities, fake invoices, and complex subcontracting chains. They even relied on so-called letterbox companies, businesses that exist only on paper, to make the money trail harder to follow. So, what can citizens take away from this? In this case, red flags to watch for include projects that sound impressive but have little visible evidence on the ground, companies with no real operations, just a mailing address or a registration, that is, letterbox companies. Another red flag is overly complicated subcontracting chains where responsibility is unclear. Or, another clue, financial transactions that seem opaque, with invoices or paperwork that don't match reality. By noticing these warning signs, citizens can raise questions and push for transparency, helping to protect public funds and ensure climate subsidies achieve their intended purpose. And now it's time for a quiz number 1. The municipality of Amalfi in Italy commissioned the construction of a flood-resilient infrastructure in a coastal region. The project aimed to protect vulnerable communities from rising sea levels and extreme weather events. However, during implementation, community members noticed delays, poor quality construction, and missing equipment, and that was raising concerns about possible corruption risks. And now answer the questions. Which of the following is a red flag for phantom subcontracting? Choose all answers that apply. A. There is no red flag. If it's a public contract, it must be implemented according to the law. B. Subcontractors were not noticed at the construction site within 3 months. C. Invoices from subcontractors with vague descriptions. And the correct answer is that a red flag should raise issues like mentioned in answer A and B, because, first of all, absence of subcontractors on site suggests that they may be phantom entities created only on paper. Vague invoices are a classic corruption red flag too, often used to conceal fraudulent payments or inflated costs. Spotting these indicators is essential for early detection of corruption, ensuring that climate adaptation projects deliver real resilience benefits to communities. Well done, thank you. Alright, time for the next quiz. This one is short and quite not very difficult. When you are watching how a public contract is carried out, what is one red flag that could signal public resources are being misused? Pick the answer you think fits the best. A. Workers that were supposed to renovate the public contract are seen renovating a private house. B. Delays of the contract progress due to the weather. C. Use of local contractors. Correct answer is A. This option is a clear red flag because it directly indicates public resources being diverted for private benefit. And it seems maybe unrealistic, but it's based on a real story. Thank you. Well done. We've reached now the final step of the monitoring process, results and impact. And this is your chance to reflect on the monitoring process and share your perspective. Even the small findings are very valuable because they can spark debate and raise awareness about integrity in public procurement for climate and environmental projects. Think about how your report could be shared, even anonymously, just to strengthen transparency. And remember, for detailed guidance, everything is explained in the monitoring template, because in the end, small observations can make a big impact. Thank you all for being so engaged today. We hope that these insights into corruption red flags can serve as practical tools, helping us move toward stronger transparency and better governance in climate and environmental work. Thank you.